The sun was setting behind the pine trees as David Rodriguez drove his pickup truck down the quiet highway. He had been driving for 3 hours straight, eager to get home after 2 months of intense Navy SEAL training. His dress uniform hung neatly in the back seat, ready for tomorrow's ceremony where he would receive his latest commendation. David kept his speed exactly at the limit, just like he always did. Years of military discipline had taught him to follow rules precisely. The small town of Willowbrook appeared ahead, with its old courthouse and sleepy main street. He had driven through this town dozens of times before without any problems. That's when he saw the flashing lights in his rearview mirror. David pulled over immediately, turning off his engine and placing his hands on the steering wheel. This was standard procedure he had learned in the military. Always be respectful, always be calm, and always follow instructions. He watched in his side mirror as a heavy-set police officer approached his truck. Officer Blake Turner knocked on the window with more force than necessary. David rolled it down slowly, keeping his hands visible at all times. "License and registration," Turner barked without any greeting. "Yes, sir," David replied politely. "I'm going to reach for my wallet now." He moved slowly, telegraphing every action. Along with his driver's license, he handed over his military identification card. Turner barely glanced at the military ID before tossing it back through the window. "You were speeding," he said flatly. David remained calm. "Sir, I was watching my speedometer carefully. I was driving exactly 55 miles per hour. Turner's face hardened. "Are you calling me a liar, boy?" The word boy hit David like a slap. He had heard that tone before, that particular way of saying it, but he kept his voice steady. "No, sir. I'm just stating what my speedometer showed." "Step out of the vehicle," Turner ordered. David complied immediately, even though he knew this was unusual for a simple traffic stop. He stood with his hands visible, maintaining perfect military posture. Turner circled around him like a predator studying prey. "Where are you coming from?" Turner asked. "Naval Special Warfare training, sir." "I'm a Navy SEAL returning home on leave." Turner laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Sure you are. And I'm an astronaut." He looked David up and down with obvious disdain. "You people always got some story." David felt his jaw tighten, but he kept his voice respectful.
"Sir, my military credentials are in order."
"You can verify them through official channels if needed." "Don't tell me how to do my job," Turner snapped. He moved closer, invading David's personal space. "Turn around and put your hands on the vehicle." This was escalating beyond any reasonable traffic stop, but David knew better than to resist. He placed his palms flat against his truck's hood. Turner began searching him roughly, far more aggressively than necessary for a speeding ticket. "What's this?" Turner asked, pulling David's challenge coin from his pocket. The bronze medallion bore the Navy SEAL trident, awarded only to those who completed the grueling training program. "That's my SEAL challenge coin, sir. It's presented to graduates of basic underwater demolition training." Turner examined it with obvious skepticism. "Looks like something you bought at a surplus store." He tossed it carelessly onto the ground. David watched his earned symbol of honor bounce on the asphalt. Every instinct screamed at him to respond, but his training held firm. "Never lose control. Never give them a reason." "Sir, I would appreciate if you didn't damage my military property." Turner spun around, his face flushed with anger. "You got a problem with how I handle evidence?" "No, sir. I'm simply requesting respectful treatment of military insignia." "Military insignia," Turner mocked. "You're nothing but a punk trying to play soldier." He shoved David hard against the truck. David absorbed the push without reacting, though his muscles tensed automatically. Years of combat training had prepared his body to respond to threats, but his mind overruled every instinct. One wrong move here could destroy everything he had worked for. Turner seemed disappointed by David's lack of reaction. He wanted a reason to escalate this further. "You're under arrest for assaulting a police officer," he announced suddenly. David's blood ran cold. "Sir, I haven't made any aggressive moves. I've been completely compliant." "Are you resisting arrest?" Turner demanded, reaching for his handcuffs. "No, sir, I am not resisting." Turner yanked David's arms behind his back with unnecessary force, cranking the handcuffs tight enough to cut off circulation. "That's what I thought I saw," he said loudly as if speaking to an invisible audience. "Subject became aggressive and attempted to assault me during a routine traffic stop." David realized what was happening. Turner was creating a false narrative, speaking as if his dashboard camera was recording. But David had noticed something Turner missed. The camera's red recording light wasn't on. As Turner shoved him toward the patrol car, David caught sight of his challenge coin lying in the dirt. The trident symbol seemed to mock him from the ground. All his years of service, all his sacrifices for his country, reduced to nothing by one man's prejudice. Turner pushed David's head down roughly as he forced him into the back seat of the patrol car. "Should have just taken your ticket like a good boy," he whispered so only David could hear. The drive to the station passed in tense silence. David stared out the window at the American flags hanging from the streetlights, flags he had sworn an oath to defend. The irony wasn't lost on him that he was now in handcuffs in the very country he risked his life to protect. At the station, Turner filled out his report with practiced ease. David watched him write lie after lie, each word potentially destroying his military career. A conviction for assaulting a police officer would end everything he had worked for. His security clearance, his position on the SEAL team, his entire future, all hanging by a thread of one man's false testimony. They processed him like any other criminal. Fingerprints, mugshot, the whole degrading routine. Through it all, David maintained his dignity and military bearing. He answered questions politely and followed all instructions precisely. Hours later, when his lawyer finally arrived, David was released on bail. As he walked out of the jail, he looked back at the building that had held him. Turner stood in the doorway, smirking with satisfaction. David retrieved his truck from the impound lot, along with his challenge coin, which had somehow made its way into the evidence bag despite Turner's dismissive treatment of it. He held the medallion in his palm, feeling its weight. It represented more than just his own achievement. It symbolized every SEAL who had earned the right to carry it. As he drove home that night, David made a silent promise. This wouldn't end here. The truth had a way of coming out, and he would make sure it did. Turner had picked the wrong person to victimize. David hadn't survived years of the world's most dangerous missions to be defeated by corruption in his own country. The court date was set for 3 months away. That gave David time to prepare, and his lawyer time to investigate. Turner might think he had won this round, but the fight was just beginning. 3 months had passed since that terrible night, and David Rodriguez sat in the front row of Willowbrook Municipal Court, his dress blue uniform pressed to perfection. The ribbons on his chest told a story of courage and dedication: Silver Star, Purple Heart, Navy Cross, and several deployment ribbons from dangerous missions around the world. He had worn the uniform on purpose, not to show off, but to remind everyone in that courtroom exactly who they were dealing with. This wasn't just some random person off the street. This was a decorated Navy SEAL who had served his country with honor for over a decade. His military lawyer, Captain Lisa Chen, sat beside him reviewing her notes one final time. She had spent weeks preparing for this case, and what she had discovered made her blood boil. The dashboard camera in Turner's patrol car had mysteriously malfunctioned that night, or so Turner claimed. But Captain Chen had found something interesting in the maintenance records. "Remember," she whispered to David, "stay calm no matter what happens." "I know this is personal, but we need to play this smart." David nodded. His SEAL training had taught him patience. Sometimes you had to wait for the perfect moment to strike. Across the aisle sat District Attorney William Morgan, a man who had built his career on the backs of police testimony. He rarely questioned what officers told him, and he especially didn't like cases where civilians challenged law enforcement. This case seemed simple enough to him: a traffic stop gone bad, an aggressive suspect, and a police officer just doing his job. Morgan shuffled through his papers with confidence. He had Turner's report, Turner's testimony, and Turner's word. In his experience, that was usually enough to secure a conviction. Juries trusted police officers, especially against defendants who might seem threatening to suburban sensibilities. Judge Robert Hartwell entered the courtroom, and everyone rose. At 62 years old, Hartwell had been on the bench for 20 years. He was known for running a tight courtroom and having little patience for what he called frivolous challenges to law enforcement. Hartwell had already reviewed the case file. On paper, it looked straightforward. Officer Turner had stopped a speeding vehicle. The driver became aggressive, and Turner was forced to arrest him for assault. The fact that the defendant was military didn't impress him much. He had seen plenty of veterans who couldn't adjust to civilian life, and thought their service gave them special privileges. The judge took his seat and called the court to order. Case number 2024 CR 1847, State v. David Rodriguez. The defendant is charged with assault on a police officer and resisting arrest. David stood as his name was called, his military posture evident even to casual observers. Several people in the gallery whispered among themselves. They hadn't expected someone who looked so professional and composed. "How does the defendant plead?" Judge Hartwell asked. "Not guilty, Your Honor," David replied in a clear, strong voice. Captain Chen had done her homework on Judge Hartwell. She knew he favored prosecution and had a pattern of giving police testimony extra weight, but she also knew he was a veteran himself, Army, Vietnam era. She hoped that military connection might help, but she wasn't counting on it. The prosecution would go first, and Morgan was eager to present his case. He had coached Turner extensively on his testimony. Keep it simple. Stick to the facts as written in the report and emphasize the danger Turner had felt during the encounter. But Captain Chen had spent the last 3 months building her defense. She had obtained Turner's complete service record with the Willowbrook Police Department. What she found was disturbing. A pattern of complaints from minority citizens, all dismissed by the department. Several use-of-force incidents that seemed questionable. And most importantly, Turner's dashboard camera had a curious history of malfunctioning during controversial stops. She had also done something else Turner didn't expect. She had contacted David's commanding officer, Admiral Patricia Rodriguez, and briefed her on the case. The Admiral was not happy about one of her decorated SEALs being railroaded by a small-town police department. As the morning proceedings began, David noticed something that made him uncomfortable. Turner kept staring at him with undisguised hatred. This wasn't professional law enforcement behavior. This was personal. Turner seemed to take David's presence in uniform as a direct challenge to his authority. The gallery was mostly empty except for a few court watchers and local reporters. This was big news in a small town. A Navy SEAL accused of assaulting a police officer. The story had already appeared in the local newspaper, with Turner portrayed as a hero who had subdued a dangerous suspect. Morgan stood to give his opening statement. He painted a picture of a routine traffic stop that turned dangerous when the defendant became aggressive and threatening. He described Turner as a dedicated officer who feared for his safety and was forced to defend himself against an unprovoked attack. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Morgan said, gesturing toward Turner, "Officer Blake Turner has served this community faithfully for 8 years. On the night in question, he was simply doing his job, keeping our streets safe. The defendant may wear a uniform, but that doesn't give him the right to assault a police officer." David listened without emotion, but inside he was fighting to control his anger. Every word was a lie, every sentence a distortion of what really happened. But he had learned patience in far more dangerous situations than this. Captain Chen's opening statement was different. She spoke quietly, forcing the jury to lean forward and listen carefully. "Members of the jury, you're going to hear a very different story over the next few days. You're going to learn about what really happened that night on Highway 47, and you're going to discover that sometimes the truth is very different from what appears in a police report." She walked over and stood beside David. "This man has served his country for over a decade. He has risked his life in combat zones around the world. He has earned some of the highest decorations our military can bestow. The question you need to ask yourselves is this: does this look like a man who would throw away everything he's worked for by attacking a police officer during a traffic stop?" Judge Hartwell was already looking skeptical. He had heard defense lawyers try to use military service as a shield before. In his view, being a veteran didn't excuse criminal behavior, but Captain Chen wasn't finished. "You're also going to learn some disturbing facts about Officer Turner's history. Facts that the prosecution hopes you'll never hear. Facts that paint a very different picture of what happened that night." Morgan objected immediately. "Your Honor, the defense is making improper accusations against Officer Turner." "Sustained," Judge Hartwell ruled. "Counselor, stick to the facts of this case." Captain Chen nodded respectfully. She had expected that objection, but she had planted a seed of doubt in the jury's minds. Now she had to nurture it carefully. The first witness would be Officer Turner himself. As he walked to the witness stand, he avoided eye contact with David. But David was watching him carefully, studying his body language, his nervous habits, the way he carried himself. In hostile territory, observation could mean the difference between life and death. Turner raised his right hand and swore to tell the truth. David almost laughed at the irony. This man wouldn't recognize the truth if it was standing right in front of him. But David also noticed something else as Turner settled into the witness chair. The man's hands were shaking slightly, and there was a thin sheen of sweat on his forehead despite the cool courtroom temperature. Turner was nervous, very nervous, and nervous people made mistakes. Officer Blake Turner adjusted his collar as District Attorney Morgan approached the witness stand. The courtroom was quiet except for the soft hum of the air conditioning and the occasional creak of wooden benches as spectators shifted in their seats. "Please state your name and occupation for the record," Morgan began. "Blake Turner, police officer with the Willowbrook Police Department for 8 years. Turner's voice was steady, but David noticed he was gripping the arms of the witness chair tightly. Morgan smiled reassuringly at his witness. "Officer Turner, can you tell us what happened on the evening of March 15th? Turner cleared his throat and launched into his prepared testimony. "I was on routine patrol when I observed a pickup truck traveling at approximately 68 miles per hour in a 55 zone. I activated my emergency lights and conducted a traffic stop." David listened carefully to every word. He had replayed that night in his mind thousands of times, and he knew Turner was already lying. His truck's cruise control had been set at exactly 55. "What happened when you approached the vehicle?" Morgan continued. Turner's voice grew more confident as he warmed to his story. "The driver seemed agitated from the moment I approached. When I asked for his license and registration, he became argumentative and hostile." "Hostile in what way?" "He questioned my authority, started making accusations about harassment. His voice got louder and his body language became increasingly aggressive." Turner glanced briefly at David before looking away. "I've been doing this job long enough to recognize when someone's about to become violent." Captain Chen scribbled notes on her legal pad, but David could see the anger in her eyes. She had coached him extensively on maintaining composure during testimony like this. Morgan nodded sympathetically. "What did you do in response to this aggressive behavior?" "I asked him to step out of the vehicle for officer safety. That's when things really escalated." Turner leaned forward, warming to his performance. "He got out of the truck cursing and yelling. Started making threats about what he was going to do to me." The jury was listening intently. A few of them glanced over at David, trying to reconcile the calm, professional-looking man in uniform with the violent aggressor Turner was describing. "Did he identify himself as military personnel?" Morgan asked. Turner waved dismissively. "He claimed to be some kind of Navy SEAL, but honestly, I hear that story all the time. Everyone thinks saying they're military is going to get them out of trouble." David's jaw tightened. That was a direct insult to every service member who had ever worn the uniform. "Please continue with what happened," Morgan prompted. "I attempted to search him for weapons, which is standard procedure when dealing with an aggressive suspect. That's when he attacked me." Turner's voice rose dramatically. "He spun around and shoved me backward. I thought he was going for my weapon." The courtroom was dead silent. This was the moment the entire case hinged on. Turner's claim that David had physically assaulted him. "I was in fear for my life," Turner continued. "This guy was bigger than me, claiming to have military training, and he had just attacked me during a lawful traffic stop. I had no choice but to defend myself and place him under arrest." Morgan nodded gravely. "Did you feel that your life was in danger?" "Absolutely. In my 8 years as a police officer, I've never felt more threatened." The defendant was clearly out of control and dangerous. David watched the faces of the jury. A few of them looked convinced by Turner's performance. Others seemed uncertain. But he could tell that Turner's story was having an impact. "Officer Turner, in your professional opinion, was the defendant's behavior consistent with someone under the influence of drugs or alcohol?" Captain Chen started to object, but Turner answered quickly. "I couldn't rule it out. His aggressive behavior and poor judgment were certainly consistent with impairment." Now David was truly angry. Not only was Turner lying about the assault, he was suggesting David had been intoxicated while driving. Anyone who knew David knew he rarely drank and would never drive under the influence. Morgan spent another 20 minutes having Turner elaborate on his story. With each detail, Turner seemed to grow more confident. He described David's supposed aggressive posture, his threatening language, and the fear Turner claimed to feel. "Officer Turner, do you have any doubt about what happened that night?" "None whatsoever." The defendant assaulted me during a lawful traffic stop, and I did what any responsible police officer would do. I arrested him to protect myself and the public. Thank you, Officer Turner. No further questions. Judge Hartwell looked at Captain Chen. Your witness, counselor. Captain Chen stood slowly, gathering her papers. David had watched her prepare for this cross-examination, and he knew she was about to demolish Turner's story piece by piece. Officer Turner, she began pleasantly, you testified that you observed my client traveling at 68 miles per hour. How did you measure this speed? Turner shifted uncomfortably. Visual estimation based on my training and experience. I see. You didn't use radar or any other speed measuring device? No, but I've been doing this for 8 years. I can estimate speed accurately. Captain Chen nodded. And you're certain it was 68 miles per hour? Yes. Not 67 or 69, but exactly 68. Turner hesitated. Well, approximately 68. Approximately. Captain Chen made a note. Now, you testified that my client became hostile immediately, but you also said he provided his license and registration when asked, correct? Yes, but... And he also provided military identification without being asked for it? He showed me some kind of ID, yes. Some kind of ID? Officer Turner, are you familiar with military identification cards? Turner's confidence was starting to waver. Somewhat. Did you examine the military ID closely? I glanced at it. Just glanced. You didn't verify its authenticity or make note of the information on it? I could tell it was probably fake. Captain Chen's voice sharpened. Probably fake? What training do you have in identifying fraudulent military documents? Morgan objected. Relevance, Your Honor? I'll allow it, Judge Hartwell said. The witness brought up the authenticity of the document. I don't have specific training in that area. Turner admitted reluctantly. So your opinion that it was fake was based on what, exactly? Turner was sweating now. Just experience. Captain Chen let that hang in the air for a moment. Officer Turner, you testified that my client became threatening and aggressive. Can you recall any specific threats he made? Turner looked confused. He was yelling and cursing. What specifically did he say? I don't remember the exact words. You don't remember any specific threats, but you were certain enough that he was dangerous to arrest him for assault? His behavior was clearly threatening. But you can't recall a single specific threat he made? Turner was getting flustered. It was the whole situation. His tone, his body language. Captain Chen walked closer to the witness stand. Officer Turner, you've testified in court before, haven't you? Yes, many times. And you understand the importance of accurate police reports? Of course. You filed your report the same night as this incident, correct? Yes. Captain Chen picked up a document from her table. I'm showing you what's been marked as Defense Exhibit A, your police report from that night. You wrote, and I quote, subject became combative and struck me with his fist. Do you see that? Turner squinted at the paper. Yes. You testified today that he shoved you, not that he struck you with his fist. Which is correct. Turner's face was red now. It happened very quickly. He pushed me hard, it felt like being hit. So your report was inaccurate? No, it was my impression at the time. Captain Chen was just getting started, but she could already see the cracks forming in Turner's story. The jury was starting to look skeptical, and Turner's nervous behavior was becoming more obvious by the minute. David sat perfectly still, but inside, he felt a spark of hope. The truth was finally starting to come out. Captain Chen moved to her table and picked up a small electronic device. Turner's eyes followed her movements nervously, beads of sweat now clearly visible on his forehead. Officer Turner, you mentioned that your dashboard camera malfunctioned that night. Is that correct? Turner nodded quickly. Yes, it's been having problems for weeks. Weeks? Captain Chen raised an eyebrow. That seems like a significant safety issue for an officer on patrol. Did you report this malfunction to your supervisor? I mentioned it. You mentioned it, but there's no written maintenance request in your file. She held up another document. In fact, according to the department's records, your camera was inspected and certified as fully functional just 2 days before this incident. Turner's face went pale. Those records might be wrong. Might be wrong? Captain Chen's voice carried a tone of disbelief. Officer Turner, are you suggesting that your department's maintenance records are falsified? District Attorney Morgan shifted uncomfortably in his seat. This wasn't going the way he had expected. Captain Chen continued her methodical destruction of Turner's testimony. Now this is interesting. I obtained the maintenance logs for all patrol vehicles in your department. She walked closer to Turner, holding a thick folder. Your dashboard camera has actually been quite reliable. In fact, it only seems to malfunction during controversial stops. I object. Morgan stood up quickly. This line of questioning is irrelevant to the current charges. Judge Hartwell looked annoyed. I'll allow it. The reliability of potential evidence is certainly relevant. Captain Chen smiled slightly. Officer Turner, in the past 2 years, your dashboard camera has allegedly malfunctioned during 7 traffic stops. 5 of those stops involved minority drivers. 2 of those drivers filed complaints against you. Don't you find that to be quite a coincidence? Turner was sweating profusely now. I don't know what you're implying. I'm not implying anything, Officer Turner. I'm stating facts. Captain Chen opened the folder and pulled out a small device. This is a backup camera system that your department recently installed in all patrol vehicles. It activates automatically whenever the primary camera is turned on. Turner's eyes widened in shock. I don't know anything about any backup system. Really? Because according to this footage, Captain Chen held up a small digital player. We have a complete recording of your interaction with my client. The courtroom erupted. Morgan jumped to his feet shouting objections while Turner stared at the device in horror. Judge Hartwell banged his gavel repeatedly to restore order. Your Honor, Captain Chen said calmly, I'd like to play Defense Exhibit B for the court. Turner suddenly stood up in the witness box, his face twisted with rage. This is ridiculous. You can't trust some backup camera over the testimony of a sworn police officer. Officer Turner, please remain seated, Judge Hartwell ordered. But Turner was beyond reason now. All his careful preparation, all his lies were about to be exposed in front of everyone. I don't care what some camera shows. That man is a criminal and a thug. The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Several jury members gasped audibly. Captain Chen pressed her advantage. Officer Turner, you just called my client a thug. Is that the kind of professional language you typically use to describe citizens? He's not a citizen, Turner shouted, his composure completely gone. People like him don't belong in this country. David felt his blood turn to ice. There it was, the real reason for Turner's actions that night. Not law enforcement, not public safety, but pure hatred. Judge Hartwell was banging his gavel furiously. Officer Turner, control yourself immediately. But Turner was in full meltdown mode. 8 years of suppressed prejudice came pouring out. You want to see the real footage? Fine. Let's watch how this punk tried to intimidate me with his fake military ID. He lunged forward, pointing an accusing finger at David. Military hero? Give me a break. Probably bought that uniform at a thrift store. David remained perfectly still, his military training keeping him calm even as Turner's insults washed over him. But inside, every combat instinct was screaming at him to respond. Captain Chen stepped between Turner and David. Your Honor, I request that Officer Turner be held in contempt of court for his outburst. Contempt? Turner screamed. I'll show you contempt. Before anyone could react, Turner jumped down from the witness stand and charged directly at David. His face was contorted with rage as he screamed racial slurs that made several spectators gasp in horror. David saw him coming but didn't move. Even with Turner rushing at him with obvious violent intent, David's discipline held firm. He would not be the aggressor. He would not give them the excuse they wanted. Turner crashed into David with his full weight, trying to tackle him to the ground. David absorbed the impact but remained standing, using his superior training and strength to control the situation without striking back. The bailiffs rushed forward, but Turner was in a complete frenzy. He threw wild punches at David's head while screaming more slurs. David blocked and deflected without retaliating, his movements precise and controlled. Fight me, you coward, Turner yelled, trying desperately to provoke David into responding with violence. Show everyone what you really are. The irony was perfect. In trying to prove David was violent and dangerous, Turner was demonstrating exactly those qualities himself. The entire courtroom watched in shocked silence as a sworn police officer completely lost control, while a decorated Navy SEAL showed remarkable restraint. It took 3 bailiffs to finally pull Turner away from David, who stood there without a scratch on him and his uniform still perfectly pressed. Turner continued screaming threats and slurs even as they dragged him toward the back of the courtroom. Judge Hartwell was stunned into silence. In 20 years on the bench, he had never seen anything like this. A police officer attacking a defendant in open court while hurling racial abuse was beyond his worst nightmares. The courtroom was in chaos. Reporters were frantically taking notes, spectators were talking loudly among themselves, and the jury looked absolutely shocked by what they had just witnessed. Captain Chen stood calmly in the middle of it all, a slight smile on her face. Turner had just destroyed his own case more thoroughly than any cross-examination ever could. District Attorney Morgan looked like he wanted to crawl under his table and disappear. His star witness had just revealed himself to be exactly the kind of officer that gave law enforcement a bad name. As the bailiffs finally got Turner out of the courtroom, he turned back and screamed one final threat at David. "This isn't over. I know people who will make sure you never wear that uniform again." The silence that followed was deafening. Every person in that courtroom had just witnessed something that would change their view of the case completely. Judge Hartwell finally found his voice. "This court will be in recess for 1 hour while I decide how to proceed." He looked directly at David. "Mr. Rodriguez, I owe you an apology for what just occurred in my courtroom." David stood and spoke for the first time since the hearing began. "Thank you, Your Honor, but I believe Officer Turner just proved my case better than any evidence could have." As the courtroom slowly emptied, David remained seated, his hands folded calmly in his lap. Captain Chen sat down beside him. "Well," she said quietly, "I don't think we'll need that backup camera footage after all." David allowed himself a small smile. "No, ma'am. I don't think we will." Outside the courthouse, word of Turner's outburst was already spreading. But neither David nor Captain Chen knew that someone very important had been watching the proceedings remotely, and that person was not happy about what she had just seen. 200 miles away at Naval Station Norfolk, Admiral Patricia Rodriguez sat in her office staring at her computer screen in complete disbelief. She had just watched a live stream of the court proceedings through a secure military network connection that Captain Chen had arranged earlier. That week, Admiral Rodriguez was not someone who showed emotion easily. 28 years in the Navy had taught her to remain calm under pressure. But what she had just witnessed made her blood boil with a fury she hadn't felt since her combat days. She picked up her secure phone and dialed a number from memory. It was answered on the first ring. NCIS Special Agent Michael Torres speaking. "Torres, this is Admiral Rodriguez. Are your people still stationed near Willowbrook?" "Yes, ma'am. We've had a team in position since yesterday, just as you ordered." "Did something happen?" The Admiral leaned back in her chair, trying to control her anger. "Agent Torres, I just watched one of my decorated Navy SEALs get physically attacked in a courtroom by the same police officer who falsely arrested him 3 months ago. The officer used racial slurs and made threats. The entire incident was witnessed by a jury and recorded by court cameras." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Ma'am, are you saying a police officer assaulted Petty Officer Rodriguez in open court?" "That's exactly what I'm saying. And that officer just made this a federal case by violating the civil rights of a United States serviceman under color of law." Admiral Rodriguez had been following David's case closely since Captain Chen first contacted her. What started as a routine traffic stop had revealed a pattern of behavior that went far beyond one corrupt cop. Her investigation had uncovered connections that reached into some very dark places. "Agent Torres, I want your team ready to move immediately. I'm going to make some phone calls and then we're going to show the good people of Willowbrook what happens when you attack one of my sailors." "Understood, Admiral. What's our timeline?" Admiral Rodriguez looked at her watch. The court was in recess for 1 hour. That gave her enough time to set things in motion. "I want your team at that courthouse in 30 minutes. Full dress uniforms, full authority. We're asserting federal jurisdiction over this case." She hung up and immediately dialed another number. This call went directly to the Pentagon. "Secretary of the Navy's office. This is Admiral Rodriguez. I need to speak with the Secretary immediately regarding a civil rights violation against one of my personnel." While she waited to be connected, Admiral Rodriguez pulled up David's service record on her computer. Silver Star for heroism in Afghanistan, Purple Heart for wounds received in combat, Navy Cross for extraordinary heroism, multiple commendations for actions that had saved American lives in dangerous situations around the world. This was not just any sailor. This was one of the Navy's finest, a man who had proven his courage and dedication repeatedly. And some small-town racist cop thought he could destroy this man's career with lies and violence. Admiral Rodriguez, this is Secretary Harrison. I understand we have a situation. Sir, we have a decorated Navy SEAL who was falsely arrested by a corrupt police officer, and that same officer just physically attacked him in open court while using racial slurs. I need authorization to assert federal jurisdiction and protect our servicemen. You have it. What do you need? I need a direct line to the FBI's Civil Rights Division, and I need it now. This goes beyond military justice. This is a federal hate crime. While Admiral Rodriguez worked her way up the chain of command, Agent Torres was mobilizing his team. The NCIS had been quietly investigating Officer Turner for weeks, ever since Captain Chen had reached out to them about David's case. What they had discovered was disturbing. Turner wasn't just a bad cop. He was connected to a network of law enforcement officers with ties to extremist groups. His social media accounts, which he thought were private, contained posts that would have been shocking even by the standards of online hate speech. Torres gathered his team in their hotel conference room. Listen up, people. We're about to take down a police officer who just committed a federal crime in front of a jury. But this is bigger than one corrupt cop. Our investigation has uncovered evidence of a conspiracy to deny civil rights to minority citizens, including active-duty military personnel. The team consisted of experienced agents who had handled similar cases before. They knew how delicate these situations could be, especially in small towns where local law enforcement might close ranks to protect their own. What's our approach? Asked Agent Sarah Kim, the team's civil rights specialist. Torres pulled up a map of Willowbrook on his laptop. We go in professionally, but with overwhelming presence. Full federal authority. The local DA and judge need to understand immediately that this case is now out of their hands. Meanwhile, back at the courthouse, Judge Hartwell was in his chambers trying to figure out what to do. In his 20 years on the bench, he had never seen anything like Turner's outburst. The man had completely destroyed his own credibility and possibly committed several crimes in the process. His clerk knocked on the door. Judge Hartwell? There's a problem with the court cameras. They've been recording everything and the media is demanding copies of the footage. Hartwell rubbed his temples. This was quickly becoming a nightmare. Turner's racist rant was going to be front-page news across the country. The entire judicial system in Willowbrook was about to become a national embarrassment. District Attorney Morgan was having an even worse day. His case had just collapsed in the most spectacular fashion possible. Not only was he going to have to drop all charges against David, but Turner was now facing potential federal charges for his actions. Morgan's phone had been ringing non-stop since Turner's outburst. The state attorney general's office wanted answers. The governor's office wanted answers. And the media wanted interviews. Back in the courtroom, David sat quietly with Captain Chen, discussing their next steps. The charges against him would almost certainly be dropped, but David wanted more than just vindication. He wanted accountability. The question now, Captain Chen said, is whether we pursue federal civil rights charges against Turner. David looked around the empty courtroom, thinking about everything that had led to this moment. Captain, this isn't just about me anymore. If Turner did this to me, how many other people has he victimized who didn't have the resources to fight back? That's exactly what I was thinking. We have the power to expose a pattern of abuse that goes back years. Unknown to both of them, that pattern was even worse than they realized. Admiral Rodriguez's investigation had uncovered evidence that Turner was part of a group of officers who specifically targeted military personnel, especially minorities. They viewed service members as a threat to their authority and had developed tactics to discredit and humiliate them. Captain Chen's phone buzzed with a text message. She read it quickly and her eyes widened. David, we need to stay in the courtroom. Something big is about to happen. What do you mean? Before she could answer, they heard the sound of multiple vehicles pulling up outside the courthouse. Through the windows, they could see black SUVs with government license plates. David recognized the sound immediately. It was the same type of convoy he had seen countless times during military operations. Official business, high level, and moving with purpose. Captain Chen smiled. I think the cavalry just arrived. The courthouse doors burst open with the kind of precision that only came from military training. 6 people in dark suits entered first, their movements coordinated and professional. Behind them came 4 Naval Criminal Investigative Service agents in full dress uniforms, their badges gleaming under the courtroom lights. Leading the group was Special Agent Michael Torres, a man whose presence immediately commanded attention. At 6 feet tall with graying temples and the bearing of someone who had seen serious action, he moved through the courtroom like he owned it. The bailiffs, who had been trying to restore order after Turner's outburst, stopped what they were doing and stared. This was clearly federal law enforcement, and they had arrived with the kind of authority that made local officials very nervous. Judge Hartwell emerged from his chambers, drawn by the commotion. When he saw the federal agents, his face went pale. This small-town case had just become something much bigger than he ever expected. Agent Torres approached the bench and presented his credentials. Your Honor, I'm Special Agent Michael Torres with NCIS. We're here on direct orders from the Secretary of the Navy to assert federal jurisdiction over this case. Before Judge Hartwell could respond, a large screen was wheeled into the courtroom. Within moments, it flickered to life, showing the seal of the United States Navy. Then Admiral Patricia Rodriguez appeared on screen, her uniform immaculate and her expression stern. The entire courtroom fell silent. Even the reporters who had been frantically taking notes stopped writing and stared at the screen. Ladies and gentlemen, Admiral Rodriguez began, her voice carrying the authority of decades of naval command. I am Admiral Patricia Rodriguez, commander of Naval Special Warfare Group 2. I have been monitoring these proceedings, and I am here to address some serious misconduct. David straightened in his chair. He had served under Admiral Rodriguez earlier in his career, and knew her reputation for fairness in protecting her sailors. The man sitting in that courtroom, the Admiral continued, pointing directly at David through the camera, is Petty Officer First Class David Rodriguez, one of the finest Navy SEALs I have ever had the privilege to command. He has served this country with distinction for over a decade, earning the Silver Star, Purple Heart, and Navy Cross through actions that have saved American lives. She paused, letting that sink in before continuing. What I witnessed today was not just an attack on one of my sailors. It was an attack on everything the United States military stands for. When a sworn law enforcement officer uses racial slurs and violence against a decorated serviceman, it becomes a federal matter. District Attorney Morgan looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. This case had gone from a simple assault charge to a national incident involving the highest levels of military command. Agent Torres took over. Your Honor, under federal law, specifically Title 18, Section 242 of the United States Code, it is a federal crime for anyone acting under color of law to willfully deprive a person of their constitutional rights. Officer Blake Turner's actions today constitute a clear violation of this statute. Judge Hartwell found his voice. Agent Torres, this is a municipal court. We don't typically handle federal matters. You're right, Your Honor, that's why we're transferring jurisdiction. This case now falls under federal authority. Torres handed the judge an official document. This is a federal warrant for the arrest of Blake Turner on charges of violating civil rights under color of law, conspiracy to deny civil rights, and federal assault charges. The courtroom erupted in whispers. The local media representatives were frantically making phone calls, realizing they were witnessing something that would make national headlines. Admiral Rodriguez continued from the screen. Furthermore, our investigation has revealed that Officer Turner's actions were not isolated incidents. We have evidence of a pattern of discrimination against military personnel, particularly minority service members. Agent Torres nodded to one of his team members, who began setting up additional equipment. Your Honor, we have spent the past 3 months investigating complaints against Officer Turner and several other members of the Willowbrook Police Department. What we've discovered is deeply disturbing. A second screen was activated showing a map of the local area with red dots marking specific locations. Each of these dots represents an incident where Officer Turner or his associates specifically targeted military personnel during traffic stops or other encounters. The evidence was overwhelming. Turner hadn't just been a bad cop. He had been systematically targeting service members, particularly those who were minorities, using his position to harass and intimidate them. We've identified 17 separate incidents over the past 2 years, Agent Torres explained. In each case, the victims were active-duty military personnel who were subjected to excessive force, false charges, or harassment. The pattern is unmistakable. Captain Chen stood up. Your Honor, if I may address the court? Judge Hartwell nodded, still trying to process everything that was happening. Your Honor, my client has been the victim of a systematic conspiracy to deny his civil rights. The federal investigation proves that this was never about a traffic violation or any criminal behavior on his part. This was about prejudice, pure and simple. David finally stood as well. For months, he had been forced to remain silent while lies were told about him. Now, with the full weight of the United States Navy behind him, he could finally speak his truth. Your Honor, I have served this country in some of the most dangerous places on earth. I have fought terrorists, rescued hostages, and defended American interests around the world. I never imagined that I would need to be rescued in my own country, in an American courtroom. His words carried the quiet dignity of someone who had faced real danger and emerged with his honor intact. Admiral Rodriguez spoke again from the screen. Petty Officer Rodriguez represents the best of American military service. He has earned the respect of his peers and his commanders through actions, not words. What Officer Turner did to him is not just a crime. It's a betrayal of everything we claim to stand for as a nation. Agent Torres approached the prosecution table. Mr. Morgan, we'll need all case files related to Officer Turner's arrests over the past 5 years. This is now part of a federal civil rights investigation. Morgan nodded weakly. His career was about to become very complicated. He had built his reputation on accepting police testimony without question, and now he was about to be exposed as either complicit in Turner's actions or grossly negligent in his oversight duties. Where is Officer Turner now? Agent Torres asked. One of the bailiffs stepped forward. He's in holding downstairs. We arrested him for contempt of court after his outburst. We'll be taking custody of him immediately. He's now facing federal charges. As if on cue, Turner was brought into the courtroom in handcuffs. The change in his demeanor was striking. Gone was the arrogant, aggressive officer who had terrorized David 3 months earlier. In his place was a man who clearly understood that his world was falling apart. When Turner saw the federal agents and the screens showing Admiral Rodriguez, his face went completely white. He had expected to face local consequences for his courtroom outburst, but federal charges were something else entirely. Agent Torres read Turner his rights while the entire courtroom watched. Blake Turner, you are under arrest for conspiracy to deprive citizens of their civil rights under color of law, violation of federal civil rights statutes, and assault. You have the right to remain silent. As Turner was led away in federal custody, he looked back at David one last time. The hatred was still there, but now it was mixed with fear. He had picked a fight with the wrong person, and now he was going to pay the price. Admiral Rodriguez had one final message. To anyone watching these proceedings, let this be clear. The United States military takes care of its own. We do not abandon our service members to corruption or injustice, and we will use every resource at our disposal to ensure that those who serve our country are treated with the respect they have earned. The screen went dark, leaving the courtroom in stunned silence. In less than an hour, a simple municipal case had become a federal investigation that would likely reach into the highest levels of state government. 3 days after Turner's arrest, the full scope of the federal investigation became public. Agent Torres called a press conference that would send shockwaves through law enforcement agencies across the country. The Willowbrook Community Center was packed with reporters from national news networks. What had started as a small-town court case was now front-page news from coast to coast. The story of a decorated Navy SEAL being attacked by a racist police officer had captured the nation's attention. Agent Torres stood at the podium with a thick folder of evidence. Behind him were enlarged photographs showing Turner at various gatherings that made the audience gasp audibly. Ladies and gentlemen, our investigation into the Willowbrook Police Department has uncovered evidence of a conspiracy that goes far beyond one officer's misconduct. What we've discovered is a network of law enforcement personnel who have systematically targeted minority citizens, with particular focus on active-duty military members. The first photograph showed Turner at what appeared to be a private meeting with several other uniformed officers. The symbols visible in the background left no doubt about the nature of the gathering. Officer Blake Turner was not acting alone. Agent Torres continued. Our investigation has identified at least 6 other officers in 3 different departments who were part of this network. They communicated through encrypted messaging apps and social media groups that promoted extremist ideologies. The second photograph was even more damning. It showed Turner with Police Chief Robert Manning and 2 other department supervisors at what was clearly a white supremacist rally. David watched the press conference from his apartment, still finding it hard to believe how quickly everything had changed. 3 days ago, he was facing prison time based on false charges. Now the people who had tried to destroy his life were themselves facing federal prosecution. Captain Chen sat beside him, taking notes as Agent Torres revealed more evidence. "This is unprecedented," she said. "I've never seen a civil rights case with this much documentation." Agent Torres was just getting started. "We've obtained records showing that this network specifically targeted military personnel because they viewed them as a threat to their authority. They developed tactics designed to provoke confrontations that could be used to file false charges. The evidence was overwhelming. Text messages between Turner and other officers discussing how to put military boys in their place. Social media posts celebrating arrests of minority service members. Meeting minutes from their private gatherings where they planned coordinated harassment campaigns. The pattern was clear, Agent Torres explained. They would conduct pretextual traffic stops on military personnel, particularly minorities, and then escalate the encounters through verbal abuse and provocation. When the victims remained calm, as their military training taught them to do, the officers would fabricate assault charges. One of the reporters raised her hand. "Agent Torres, how many victims have you identified?" "So far, we've documented 43 separate incidents involving 31 victims over the past 5 years. All of the victims were active-duty military personnel. 28 of them were minorities. The numbers were staggering. This wasn't just individual prejudice. This was organized persecution of the men and women who served their country. We've also discovered that this network had contacts within the District Attorney's Office," Agent Torres continued. "Prosecutor William Morgan has been placed on administrative leave, pending investigation into his handling of these cases." Back at his apartment, David's phone had been ringing constantly. News organizations wanted interviews, but Admiral Rodriguez had advised him to stay quiet until the investigation was complete. Military lawyers were handling all media requests. His doorbell rang and David opened it to find his neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, an elderly woman who had lived in the building for 30 years. She was holding a plate of homemade cookies. "David, honey," she said, "I saw the news. I just wanted you to know that everyone in the building is proud of you. What that awful man did to you was wrong, and I'm glad they caught him." David accepted the cookies with a smile. "Thank you, Mrs. Patterson, that means a lot. You know, my late husband was in the Army during Vietnam. He always said the real test of a soldier wasn't how they fought, but how they handled injustice. You handled yourself with real dignity, son." These small moments of support meant more to David than all the media attention. Real people, regular Americans, understood what had happened and were standing with him. Meanwhile, the investigation was expanding. Agent Torres's team had executed search warrants on Turner's home, his police locker, and his personal devices. What they found painted a picture of a man consumed by hatred. Turner's computer contained thousands of images, videos, and documents related to white supremacist ideology. His browsing history showed regular visits to extremist websites. His personal communications revealed connections to similar networks in other states. But the most damaging evidence was Turner's own documentation of his crimes. He had kept detailed records of his encounters with minority service members, treating them like trophies. Photos of military personnel during humiliating arrests, screenshots of news articles about veterans he had targeted, even audio recordings of some encounters where his racist language was clearly audible. Judge Hartwell was also facing scrutiny. Federal investigators were reviewing every case he had presided over involving minority defendants and police testimony. Patterns were emerging that suggested he may have been aware of the officer's misconduct, but chose to ignore it. The judge called an emergency meeting with his staff. "How bad is this going to get?" he asked his clerk. "Judge, the federal investigators are looking at over 200 cases from the past 5 years. They're specifically interested in any case where you accepted police testimony without question, especially involving minority defendants." Hartwell rubbed his temples. His entire career was about to be dissected by federal investigators. Cases he had considered routine were now being viewed as potential civil rights violations. District Attorney Morgan was having similar problems. Federal agents had seized his case files and discovered a pattern of declining to prosecute police officers, despite evidence of misconduct. His office had also failed to investigate multiple complaints against Turner and his associates. "Sir," his assistant district attorney said during an emergency staff meeting, "the feds are asking about the Rodriguez case specifically. They want to know why we pursued charges despite the lack of credible evidence." Morgan had built his career on maintaining good relationships with local police. He had rarely questioned their testimony and had never investigated their conduct. Now that strategy was destroying him. "What did we actually have against Rodriguez?" he asked, reviewing the file. Turner's testimony and his police report. No physical evidence, no independent witnesses, no corroborating evidence of any kind. Morgan realized the devastating truth. He had tried to send a decorated Navy SEAL to prison based solely on the word of a corrupt, racist police officer. The federal investigators were going to tear him apart. Agent Torres was preparing for the next phase of the investigation. Turner's network extended beyond Willowbrook into neighboring jurisdictions. Federal agents were coordinating with multiple local agencies to identify other victims and other corrupt officers. The case was also attracting attention from civil rights organizations across the country. The NAACP, the ACLU, and several veterans groups had all issued statements supporting David and calling for systemic reforms in police departments nationwide. Most importantly, other victims were starting to come forward. Service members who had been too intimidated or too isolated to speak out before were now contacting federal investigators with their own stories of harassment and abuse. Each new victim strengthened the case and revealed more about how the network operated. They had targeted not just individual service members, but also their families. Spouses had been harassed during traffic stops. Children of military personnel had been targeted at school events. The persecution had been systematic and cruel. As Agent Torres prepared for Turner's federal trial, he knew this case would set important precedents. It would show that no one, not even law enforcement officers, was above the law when it came to civil rights violations, and it would send a clear message that attacking America's service members would result in the full weight of federal justice coming down on the perpetrators.